Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Briefing. I have a quick item at the top, and then I'm happy to open it up for questions. Secretary of State John Kerry will begin meetings in New York City, New York, on Sunday, September 22nd, in conjunction with the 68th session of the United Nations General Assembly. While in New York, Secretary Kerry will participate in a variety of meetings and side events highlighting U.S. leadership on multilateral issues, including Syria, the Middle East peace process, and economic diplomacy. On the margins of the UN General Assembly, Secretary Kerry will meet with a number of his counterparts to discuss a range of bilateral and global issues. Again, he begins meetings on Sunday. As we have a more, I'm doing this for you, Matt, a more fulsome schedule of his meetings at the UN, we will be happy to provide that. With that, Matt, over to you.
So you don't accept the correct definition of the word,
I'm just teasing you a little bit at the beginning of the briefing. It's
Gotcha.
good to see you back.
Well, it's great to be back. Thank you very much.
Go ahead and start us off.
I want to shake things up a little bit by not asking you about Syria first.
Okay.
But by not too much, because I am going to ask you about a state sponsor of terrorism that begins with the letter S.
Okay.
That would be Sudan.
Okay.
Is there any update to what you had said on Monday about the President Bashir seeking a visa to come to the States to go to the General Assembly?
No update. As I said on Monday, I think it was, we can confirm that we have received a visa application for President Bashir of Sudan to come here for the General Assembly. Again, I reminded everyone what he stands accused of, but I don't have any update for you in terms of that process.
Is this going to be one of these things where we'll know whether he was issued or denied a visa by whether he actually shows up in New York, or is there some way that is there some recognizing the confidentiality of visa applications? Mm-hmm. Is there some way that around it? I mean, is there
around
some
the
way?
Confidentiality?
No. Is there some way that we will know prior to him either appearing in New York or not appearing in New York whether he has gotten a visa or not?
I don't want to get ahead of the process here. You did mention the confidentiality of visa requests. Obviously, we confirmed that he's put in a request. I'm not just going to probably go any further today. As you know, as host nation of the United Nations, we are generally, I'm not speaking to this case specifically, but generally obligated to admit foreign nationals traveling to UN headquarters for official UN business. I don't have anything else to preview, though.
Does your lack of membership or lack of being no longer being a signatory to the Rome Treaty, much less not having ratified it when the Clinton administration did sign it, does that have any impact on this decision?
On the visa decision?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge, but again, I don't want to get into specifics here, but I not to my knowledge.
So anyone facing ICC charges, a visa application from them does or does not include consideration of that, since you, the United States, are not a state party to the...
I'm not, I think, going to go any further into how these decisions about visa cases are made. I mentioned we have an obligation as host nation for the UN, but I'm just not going to speculate what action we may or may not take, other than to say we act consistent with our relevant international obligations, as I mentioned.
But you do not have any obligation to the ICC?
Again, we're looking at the visa application. I just don't have anything more on that.
Well, in general, forget about visa applications. Mm-hmm. Do you have is there any reason that the United States is obligated to respect or to follow directives from or decisions from the ICC?
I just don't have anything further for you on this, Matt. I'm happy to look into the specifics of this. I know there are a lot of legal, international
I was under the impression that
issues at play here. I just don't want to get into those details right now.
Right. I was under the impression that these questions had been asked on Monday and that you had said that you would take them, so you didn't get an answer?
I believe the question I took on Monday was about our obligations as host nation. There are a lot of complicated issues at play here, and I just don't want to misspeak without having all the facts in front of me.
Fair enough. And then last one on this. Have you seen what the government of Sudan said today about this, saying that you should grant him a visa and that you are in no, and I presume this refers back to your comments on Monday, you are in no position to give sermons or advice to other countries about human rights or anything having to do with International Criminal Court, of which you are not a member.
Well, I haven't seen those comments, to be honest, but I will remind everyone that President Bashir stands accused of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity by the ICC. I think those charges speak for themselves. I don't want to get ahead of this process here. Again, we have obligations as a host nation with the United Nations, but I just don't have anything further on this issue.
Can you spell out yet again clearly the obligations as host nation that you have?
Right, separate and apart from this case, because I don't want to comment on this case specifically. We are generally obligated to admit foreign nationals traveling to UN headquarters in New York for official U.S. business. I'm not going to go... UN business, yes, thank you. I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to go further into what that actually means in terms of specific visa cases, obviously.
No, I don't. I can see that you're not going to ask a specific case, but how does that jibe with the, if there's a warrant out from an international court for the arrest of somebody, how are those? Do they conflict with each other, those two obligations?
I'm not going to go into more detail about how those different obligations play into visa application requests. I just don't have more detail for you on that. But again, when we have anything more to announce, we certainly can do so.
I mean, in such cases where you have to give a visa to somebody, are you also obliged to guarantee that they will not be arrested on U.S. territory, either by yourself or any other enforcement or agencies?
It's a good question, and I'm just not going to speculate about any details of a decision of whether he's allowed to or not allowed to travel here on a visa. I'm just not going to even generally get into those kind of issues. On this same issue?
On Bashir, yeah. I just wanted to ask you, is there such a thing as an extradition? I know that you're not a member of the ICC, but there such a thing as an extradition that a member of the ICC, let's say a European member, can say, we want this person who has an outstanding warrant for his arrest extradited. Is there such a thing?
Saeed, I don't know the answer. I'm happy to take it. And if I know there's a lot of questions about this. There's a lot of complicated issues here. I'm trying to get as much information as possible while understanding there's an ongoing process that we can't get into. So I'm happy to take it as part of the broader set of questions on this issue. Yes? Wait, do we have anything else on this? Yeah.
If any person, not necessarily an official from a different country, coming for UN something, would the U.S. honor warrants from the ICC?
I can take that question as well.
Thanks.
So this is a precedent, or whether this is something like this has occurred in the past with, other nationals. Who's the first?
Sitting head of state.
Sitting head of state. Okay.
Ever to be what?
To be indicted, but
To be
sitting
indicted,
head
yes,
of state.
No, but I mean, there might have been other international arrest warrants out by other organisations.
I just don't know the answer.
Not just the ICC.
Yeah. So I apologize for, we don't have all the details in front of me. I'll take that as part of this question set. And we can talk more about it tomorrow as well, but I'll endeavor to get answers tonight to some of these. It is a very complicated issue, as
I
you
would
want.
hope you would endeavor this afternoon before everyone has gone home for the day.
I will
right?
endeavor as
You're not going to be tasking this at 10 p.m.,
as
are
quickly
you?
as possible.
Thank
No,
you.
my press people will be angry if I task them at 10 p.m. on this. Yes, another question, anything else on this? On Sudan?
Yeah, did the U.S. envoy return from his trip to Sudan and South Sudan? And there were reports yesterday that the senior officials in Khartoum refused to meet with him.
I believe he's still there. Let me double check on his travel. I don't have anything to announce at the moment on specific meetings. If I have a full readout of his meetings on the ground, I can endeavor to get it for you, but it is my understanding that he's still in the region.
One more on the visa. When the process should be done, should be finished?
I don't
Not this
have
week,
any-
before.
I don't have any other details about a specific visa application because of confidentiality. I just can't get into it.
Where did you receive the application, actually? In Khartoum?
I don't know the answer. I'll see if I can find out. I know I'm taking lots of questions. This is not a good way to start a briefing. But thank you. I just don't know the answer. I will endeavor to find out. Anything else on Bashir? Okay. You can, yes.
This one is regarding the killing of the head of the Independent Election Commission in Afghanistan's northern province. Was wondering whether you think that this marks already early signs of a deterioration in security, and that could affect the election, which is still a little way away. But the fact that the killing and that the Taliban has claimed responsibility.
Thank you for the question. It's an important one, and I'd like to make a few points on this. First, obviously, we strongly condemn the killing of Mr. Aman, who was the head of the Election Commission in Kunduz province, as you mentioned. We extend our condolences to his family and friends. A peaceful and constitutional political transition is critical to Afghan stability, and this needs to happen through a credible, transparent, and inclusive electoral process. Obviously, targeting those working to carry out these elections works against the aspirations of the Afghan people. But I would take a step back and say that more broadly, we actually have seen some positive signs recently as well. Candidate registration has begun. These are positive steps forward. So obviously, this is a complicated process, and we, of course, express our strong condolences today to his family. But we want to keep seeing some of the positive steps we've seen. And as you mentioned, the election is a little ways away, and we're hoping we'll see more of those positive steps going forward. What else?
Different subject? On Syria, Russian Minister Lavrov is averring to some set of evidence regarding alleged chemical weapons use by the Syrian opposition forces that he says he is planning to share with the UN Security Council. Your thoughts about that?
Well, we have seen no credible reporting, no credible evidence that the opposition has used chemical weapons in Syria, period. We've been joined by 36 other countries in declaring that the Assad regime is responsible for the use of chemical weapons on August 21st. We've laid out our intelligence assessment, and it's one in which we have high confidence.
You have seen statements by Ms. Del Ponte, for example, also averring to chemical weapons use by the Syrian opposition forces prior to August 21. Do you find her statements not credible?
Again, we have seen no credible reporting, no credible evidence that the opposition used chemical weapons in Syria. Period.
And there's been, does that judgment by the United States government preclude a finding that the Syrian opposition forces have at times possessed chemical weapons or their precursor agents?
Excuse me, it's a good question. I know that we've been asked questions about that in here in the past. I'll see what our latest assessment of that is. Obviously, we've seen these reports, and any possession of chemical weapons would be concerning. I'd note that the opposition has come out very strongly at numerous points throughout this process and said they'd give full access to inspectors, to areas they controlled. They've pledged to be a constructive part of this process. If we have any new assessment on that, I'm happy to share it.
So you can't, from the podium here, rule out that the opposition forces have at any time possessed chemical weapons?
I just don't honestly, James, I just don't have our latest assessment on that in front of me. I'm happy to take it. What we can say is we have no credible evidence that anyone other than the regime has used chemical weapons in Syria.
And have you seen any preview of in any form or fashion of what the foreign minister in Russia is talking about?
I haven't, certainly. I'm not aware of one. Again, we've seen no credible evidence pointing to what he had to say, but we're always happy to look at evidence and evaluate it going forward.
But you haven't seen what he...
Not to my knowledge. I don't know about every single person in this building. I can double check with folks, but not to my knowledge.
On the declaration...
I'll go to you next. You sat too far back today, Saeed.
On
Go
the
ahead, Elise.
declaration that the Syrians were supposed to produce on their chemical weapons arsenal, the agreement between the U.S. and Russia states for a week. They should declare it within a week. When did that kind of week start, and when is the week over?
Well, the agreement, I believe, was finalized on Saturday, if I have my dates right. So obviously these are timelines. This is a framework for how we want to move forward. So hopefully we will see a declaration from the Syrian regime in the coming days. I don't want to put a hard and fast deadline on it, but we are waiting. We'll be awaiting that through the OPCW.
So what happens if they don't declare it by Saturday?
Well, again, these are timelines, right? Our goal is to see forward momentum, and obviously we know it takes time as well. This is really the first step in assessing how serious the Syrian regime is at working towards this framework that us and the Russians have agreed to. Obviously, if they submitted a list that was less than complete or that we thought was less than complete, we'll address that then.
I'm sorry, wait. Why do you say it would take? It's time consuming. I mean, if it is correct, as you guys claim, that the Syrian government has complete control over this, knows exactly where the stuff is, then presumably they have a list of their own that they could just turn over if they wanted to.
I have no idea if there's one central list sitting somewhere in the Assad regime's bureaucracy. It's a process, and we want to make sure it's done in a thorough manner.
But when you say it's a timeline, and then you say there's no hard and fast dates, I thought that first of all, the Secretary said in London that if he did it within a week, then he could avert a strike. Well, that week is gone. That week has passed, and there hasn't been a strike. So
When he raised the idea the first time.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then the
But the
U.S.
framework
Russian
outlined a
agreement
timeline.
says within a week or 1 week from whatever day, so a week from Saturday. And now you say that's not a hard and fast deadline.
We've never said it was a hard and fast deadline. I stood at this podium
Well,
on
what-
Monday.
okay,
I stood
what
at
is
this
it
podium
then?
on Monday and said these are timelines. Obviously, this is a process that is very complicated, and we want to see forward momentum. We have no reason to believe that we're not going to get a
All
declaration
right. So
within
if
the
it
time
slips,
frame.
so if it slips until Tuesday or Wednesday or something like that, that's not that big an issue for you.
Again, we need to see progress made. We need to take a look. What's important to us is that this moves as swiftly as possible,
Yes.
not setting arbitrary deadlines, but also that the declaration is comprehensive,
you
right?
already-
It's the substance.
But you already set an arbitrary deadline.
We never
of a
said it
week.
was a deadline, Matt. We always said this was a timeline. We've said it repeatedly,
Well-
that we need to see forward momentum, understanding that it's complicated and that these are targets on a calendar. These aren't set in stone because this is a complicated process.
Well,
but you're getting 2 steps ahead of where we are. We're not even,
I
today's
thought
only,
this was the first
today's
test.
only Wednesday.
Right, I know, but if this is the first
So we
test,
can have this conversation on next Monday if we still haven't seen anything from the Syrians. How
okay,
about that?
that's fine.
Okay.
But I want to, it's slightly different though. If this is correct, correct me if I'm wrong, this is what you believe to be the first test of Syria's willingness or Syria's commitment to actually following through,
There's
correct?
seriousness to be part of the process, but again, it's going to be a complicated process with ups and downs. Nobody's naive about that. We'll keep working with the Russians, but let's be clear that the onus here is on the Syrian regime to live up to their
All right.
obligations.
And then I presume that all the action is pretty much in New York right now, right, on the resolution?
A lot of the, yes, on the resolution, absolutely. The P5, I believe, is meeting again today in a closed session. They met yesterday. We continue to work on potential UNSCR text, and hope again for the
right.
strongest possible enforcement mechanism.
In terms of, though, here in Washington, or what the Secretary is doing in phone calls or meetings with his counterparts, is there anything happening on that end?
I had a couple phone calls from today. I spoke with Turkish Foreign Minister Davutoglu and Saudi Foreign Minister Saud al-Faisal. I don't have comprehensive readouts of their conversations for you, but I know that Syria obviously is the big topic of discussion with both of them. And next week at UNGA, I think this will be a big topic of discussion as well. He has a number of bilateral meetings. He'll be part of a number of sessions there, and I think that'll be a big topic.
Those conversations that you just said were yesterday?
Wednesday. Today.
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 Okay. He just saw them in person 2 days ago in
He
Paris.
likes talking to them. That they're very important partners.
Okay.
Why are you dubious that he would talk to them after
No, I'm
just
not
seeing them?
dubious. I'm just curious as to why, since he had just seen them.
He talks to his counterparts from key countries very frequently, as you all know. This is not in any way unusual for the secretary.
I
to
think
pick
you're
up.
dubious, Matt.
Thank you, James.
I think you're in a perpetual state of being dubious, Matt. Yes,
Dubiosity.
I'm going to go to Saeed because he's been patiently waiting. Then I'm going to come back up to you, and then we'll go
On
around.
the weak issue, I think it was the understanding in the whole world, definitely our understanding, we've been writing about it, that it is a deadline.
Well,
That,
we never use that word, Saeed.
It begins
ever.
on the 14th, it ends on the 21st. I thought it was a deadline.
That's not actually what the framework says. It doesn't have a date. It doesn't have a day. And we always said that these weren't deadlines, they're timelines. It's a framework for moving forward. But we don't want anybody saying if they're at 12:01 on the day after people think the, quote, non-existent deadline is, then suddenly the whole thing's falling apart. That's
And
what
it-
we're trying to avoid.
And if I may go back to the issue of the evidence that on the opposition.
Hold on.
Use-
I
the use-
couldn't hear what you said, Saeed.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. It's okay.
you
You're
know,
too far back today.
Okay.
I can't deal with it.
I came late. Apologies. Okay. On the issue of the evidence, the use of the opposition by the chemical weapons.
Uh-huh.
Now, you're saying that you have not seen any evidence thus far. Does that preclude the existence of evidence as the Russians claim?
We have seen no credible evidence, period.
Okay.
We'll take a look at any evidence that comes in and evaluate it, but we've been looking at this issue for a long time. We have very good intelligence into the issue, and we haven't seen any evidence of it. We really haven't.
And lastly, Vitaly Churkin, the Russian representative, made it quite, an accusation. He said that if you listen to them, and on March, the incident in March near Aleppo, the incident on 21st of August may not have happened. Do you concur?
I think that it's very clear who responsibility lies with for what happened on August 21st, and it's the Assad regime, period. Yep, I'm coming up, Marie. It's okay.
Apologies.
Jen and I are good friends. It's fine.
And also, if I missed the top, if you said at the beginning, the Secretary said that he was going to meet again at UNGA with Foreign Minister Lavrov.
I don't have a specific date for that yet. All I announced at the beginning for those who weren't here was that his meetings will begin on Sunday in New York, and that we'll provide a fuller readout of, or a fuller preview of that schedule when we have it.
Okay.
We don't have a date for the Lavra.
Is it correct, however, that there are currently no bilats or any kind of meeting scheduled for Saturday, the 28th, which had been kind of floated as the idea?
I don't know the answer to that. I know he had mentioned that date. I think we're working around that date, but the schedule, as everyone knows, for UNGA is very complicated and always in flux until the last minute.
And can I ask also, yesterday there was some report, and forgive me, I can't remember where it was, that Assad is now busily moving around some of his weapons, chemical weapons stocks, to hide them from the international community. Does this gel with what you guys are hearing from the ground?
Well, we've seen these reports, and clearly that would be concerning to us. We have ways of monitoring his chemical weapons stockpiles, and we will keep our eyes on them to ensure that he's not doing that. Obviously, this is a key part of any assessment about the how big and where the stockpile and the key parts of it exist. This is something we'll be looking at going forward. It's also why it's so important that inspectors get on the ground as soon as possible. This is what we and the Russians called for in the framework agreement in Geneva.
But as of today, you don't know that those reports that came out yesterday are true.
We've seen those reports actually since the 21st. There have been a number of reports that he might be moving them around, so we'll keep assessing that and come with an assessment about where we believe the sites are, and we'll take a look at the list they provide and see how they match up.
Can I read?
Yep, go ahead.
Do you have another?
No, it's a different.
I was wondering
If you were surprised at why the Russians keep repeating this over and over again during the day, that they are not, that the Assad regime is not to blame for this. Have you seen anything has Russia presented anything to you as to why it keeps saying this?
Not to my knowledge. I know there were a lot of discussions, private discussions in Geneva about the range of issues on this issue, and we came to a framework agreement about how to move forward. I think one thing to keep in mind that's important is that what we're focused on now are actions. There are a lot of words out there from a lot of different people on this subject. We're focused on what happens now. We know what our intelligence assessment says. We have very high confidence in it. We're going to keep working with the UN, with the OPCW, with the Russians, not to focus on whatever words someone is saying in any given day, but actually on the actions that are taking place as part of the framework agreement.
Can I change the subject?
I think we have a couple more in here, and then Elise, you can be the next to change it.
Sorry, you just raised the OPCW. I wondered if you could update us where we are with that, because the framework agreement has to go to the OPCW now for a resolution.
Right. So we will be, and I can double check on where that is. I don't believe we've submitted formally, but let me double check on this. Our request to the OPCW, based on the framework agreement, to expeditiously move forward in a more brisk fashion with this framework agreement, and in a quicker fashion than they normally do. Obviously, the OPCW will be making a decision on that, hopefully in the coming days as well. I'll check and see if we've formally submitted it. I don't believe we have, but I just don't have the latest. But that is the next step in the process at the OPCW. That's absolutely right. Yeah. Syria still?
Yeah. You've indicated from the podium here some flexibility on the part of the United States and its allies with respect to the timing of this declaration, precisely because it's such a complex and perhaps unprecedented process.
I would call this an unprecedented, I think, timeline, certainly.
And also with respect to the fact that it's an active war zone. So there's a number of reasons to regard this as unprecedented and complex, and for those reasons I think you have indicated that the United States and its allies are prepared to be flexible within reason as to the timing of the submission of this declaration. That's what occasions your statement, for example, that these are timelines and not deadlines.
I'm not going to use the term flexible. I think we're realistic about how complicated this is.
Okay.
But this obviously, as we've said repeatedly, can't be a stalling tactic.
Will you display similar realism where the substance of the declaration is concerned? I think we could agree, for example, that a declaration that were to provide an accounting of only half of the 1,000 metric tons of chemical warfare agents and their precursors that the Assad regime is estimated by the United States to have would be considered a gross violation of the framework and completely unacceptable. Similarly, an omission of perhaps 1 to 2% of the known items would be considered with less gravity. Can you, in your own words, give us some kind of guidance on how U.S. policymakers will approach the declaration where the substance is concerned with respect to potential omissions or evasions, some of which could be of greater seriousness than others?
It's a really good question, and I appreciate you asking it. If Syria, if the Assad regime were to submit an incomplete inventory, incomplete accounting of its CW program, it would, of course, be in non-compliance with the agreement. Now, I'm not going to put a percentage on what would be worse or better or acceptable or unacceptable. They need to submit a full accounting, period. But this is a complicated process. We're going to work with the Russians, with the UN, with the OPCW to make sure we have a full accounting. So again, when they submit this accounting, we will see the first sign of their seriousness. But we think the process is so important that we need to keep engaging in it with all of our counterparts. And we can have the discussion if that eventually comes to pass. I don't want to get ahead of it here. They may submit a full accounting. If they don't, we can have a discussion about that, what that means for the process going forward. Absolutely, at that time.
Marie, when you said that you didn't put any deadline, did you mean that the Syrian regime can take his time to provide the list?
Not at all. Again, this can't be a stalling tactic. I'm not trying to provide flexibility for the Syrian regime. In fact, far from it. What we're saying is we recognize this is a complicated process, and I don't want, a press story, again, at 12:01, the day after you think we should have had this, saying the whole process has fallen apart. Because I don't think that's the case. These are complicated issues, and these are ambitious deadlines, or timelines. Oh, I just did it. These are ambitious timelines, but we wouldn't have set them out if we didn't think they were in the realm of possibility. I know.
Go ahead.
Deadlines, timelines, I know. Timelines, yes.
Okay, at the UN, are you still seeking a Chapter 7 resolution?
What we've said, I spoke to this on Monday, and I think Jen spoke about this yesterday, that we obviously want the strongest possible obligations and enforcement mechanisms included in the text. That's all being discussed right now. I don't want to get ahead of the ball game here in terms of where we are. We'll see how the process plays out at the UN. But we, of course, are calling for the strongest enforcement mechanism possible. And we've also said that we maintain the threat of military force independent of that process.
Marie, I don't understand the answer that you gave to James a few seconds ago. You said, I don't want to say what's going to be acceptable or unacceptable, but surely...
He asked about percentages. Would 50% be unacceptable, but 2% be acceptable? I'm not going to say what percentage won't be acceptable. If they don't submit a full accounting, that would mean they're in non-compliance.
Yeah,
but what that...
Surely anything less than 100% would be unacceptable.
It would mean they were not in compliance, correct?
So that would not be acceptable.
I don't want to use the terms acceptable or unacceptable. We will look at what they...
Well, why not? When it's
because I'm going to use my words and not yours.
Well,
what we're going to...
you were the ones... Sorry. Maybe I'm in some alternate universe.
Let me finish this, and then we'll go into the next question.
You were the one who used the words acceptable and unacceptable.
I was answering his question.
I know, but you
about
used
percentages.
The words.
What we're saying is we're going to take a look at what the Syrian regime comes to us with. I'm not going to talk about if 1% is less bad than 50% off, right?
But surely it doesn't matter. Because
I was answering his question.
I know, but I'm trying to make sure that if they do not submit a full and complete accounting, that would be unacceptable. They would be in there's no difference between non-compliance.
You can use whatever words you want. I'm going to use whatever words I want. Can I finish this? Because I think this is important. It's okay. They would be in non-compliance. What I was saying...
Which is unacceptable.
Is we will... I don't...
What? Why? So non-compliance could somehow be acceptable to you?
I'm not going to put a value judgment on it, Matt. What I'm going to say, policy speaking, is that if they are determined to be in non-compliance because they don't submit a full accounting, we will determine our next steps under the framework agreement and how we think it's best to move forward.
How will you know that it's a full 100? Do you have 100% accounting of what you think?
We have an assessment of how big we believe the stockpile is. We agreed with the Russians on the size of it. We have a listing of where we believe the sites are of the various parts of the CW program, the precursor agents, the stockpiles, all of those issues. So again, this is an assessment. We will keep refining it as we go forward. But that's, again, why I think I would emphasize the importance of inspectors on the ground to verify our assessment and to indeed verify what the Syrians tell us. Yes, I'm going to go here and then work my way back.
Just by way of clarifying the intent of my question, and not to load us down in hypotheticals, but for example, it would seem to me that the Syrians could declare 99% of what they have in their stockpiles and arsenals and related facilities and items and equipment, but if they are omitting the most important element, that would be a major omission.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to pay too much attention to percentages. I only suggested that as one example of how an accounting could be faulty.
I think I knew where your question was going, actually.
So all I really wanted to obtain with my question was a sense from you on behalf of the government whether there will be attention paid to different kinds of potential problems with the declaration and a realistic judgment made on the basis thereof, and which might even include sins of commission versus omission, or whether, in fact, an apparent problem with the declaration might be accidental or intentional and so forth. These are the kinds of range of things you're going to be paying attention to?
Absolutely. I think it's completely fair to say that we will look at the submission, go over it with a fine-tooth comb, and determine what our response will be and how we'll move forward with the OPCW, with the UN. And again, all of those things that you mentioned play into this assessment of their submission. Absolutely.
So the response will be proportional to any problem detected with the submission?
Well, I don't want to... I'm not going to use those words. What I'll say is that how we move forward, I don't want to use the word response, how we move forward with the OPCW, with our process that we're engaged in there, with the UN process, the discussions that happen that we'll have with our counterparts on this will, of course, be driven in part by what this declaration from the Syrian government actually looks like. Saeed.
Do you expect the
Yes.
Russians to be on the up and up as far as this information is concerned? Since they do have a very close relationship with the Syrians, they presumably know where all these sites are. And have they made that commitment? Did you demand from them in the agreement that they should give you whatever they know about these sites and the stockpiles?
One of the things we did in Geneva was sit down and look at our different intelligence assessments about where the stockpiles are. We agreed on the number. We are having further discussions about where the sites may lay. I think I would defer to the Secretary's comments when he said verify but verify when it comes to what the Russians are saying and doing in implementing this agreement.
Okay, because the issue of percentages is very important.
Of
It
course it
harkens
is.
back to the Iraq issue. I remember the inspectors, or the deputy head of inspector, the deputy for Butler at the time, saying that Iraq was basically 95, 96% free of all chemical weapons, yet the war was waged.
I am going to refrain from answering any questions. I think that I don't have a good historical comparison to the situation in Syria. I know it's tempting to do. I absolutely know that, but this is a different situation. We have here an agreement with the Russians on a framework to move forward. That's what we're focused on. Let's finish up Syria just with a few more. You're on Syria. Okay, we'll finish it up.
I mean, part of the issue in Geneva, though, was the Russians were not on board with the number of sites that the Americans say that exist in Syria, which was 45, according to the Americans. So I wanted to ask on what was...
It wasn't actually a major focus of the discussion. It's my understanding in Geneva that's one of the ongoing topics of discussions with the
so
Russians.
I understand. But my question is really, what is, or how was your assessment of 45 sites pulled together, and what's it based on? Is it the most current information, or is it information, given that we're in a civil war, you know, or is it information that's maybe old, or...
It's the latest intelligence assessment as I know it. And I think one thing that will be important to do over the coming days, so let's engage in this discussion in here or elsewhere, about our assessment of the program as we get closer to a declaration indeed by the Syrian regime. I think that's an important discussion to have. Our counterparts in the intelligence community are constantly updating their assessment, and I want to make sure we have the most up-to-date information for you as we evaluate this hearing.
So as you believe it, the information that is now currently on the table is the most up-to-date American assessment?
That's my understanding. But again, this is constantly updated as we get new information, in which we do, quite frankly, a lot on this issue.
Thanks, Marie. Earlier this month, there was a group of Syrian human rights activists and members of the Syrian community and doctors who got together to present evidence from the August 21st attack. And one of the things they said was that the situation right now in Syria is partially a result of the failure of the UN mechanism, including the Security Council. And those concerns were echoed actually on the same day by your own ambassador to the UN, who said, I think her words were, the Security Council we have today is not the Security Council we need to respond to this crisis. So now as the resolution, Security Council resolution process heats up again, what would you say to allay those kinds of concerns?
No, it's a good question. We've been very clear about the problems we've had in the Security Council. On the Syria issue writ large, we've talked about some of the vetoes that we've seen. Again, not on chemical weapons specifically, but on the issue writ large. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And a couple weeks ago, I think people would have said the Russians will never agree with you to a framework agreement to destroy these weapons. So diplomacy is all about taking advantage of opportunities that are, at one point unforeseen, but then happen to come about, and seeing if those can come to fruition. Nobody's naive here, certainly, about the UN process, but we're at the table with the P5, including today, talking about a text. And I think there is some good important language in the framework agreement that we and the Russians both agreed to about how to move forward on this issue, including at the UN. So nobody's naive. Ambassador Power is doing very hard work up there trying to get a good text that everyone's happy with.
Has she
Used the word twice, naive. So it is no longer the case that it is naive to think that Russia is on the verge of changing its position and allowing the UN Security Council to assume its rightful role as the enforcer of international peace and security.
I
That
think-
was a quote from your ambassador to the United Nations.
I think
It is no longer naive.
we make quotes on a specific day given the specific circumstances. And again, 2 weeks ago, nobody in this room would have said, oh, today we have a situation where we're negotiating an UNSCR, we have a framework agreement, and Syria has agreed to sign the CWC. 2 weeks ago, those things would have seemed implausible to many people in this room. So we make statements
Right.
about the probability of certain
Right.
actions happening based on what's going on that day. Again, diplomacy. I'm giving lots of definitions today, but diplomacy is about adjusting and changing, and again, going with what's happening on the ground to see
Okay.
if there's a different situation on
So-
today as there was yesterday.
Right, okay.
It's
so
not being
given-
static.
So this, right, okay, so given the changing circumstances, it is no longer naive
I'm
to
not going to
think
parse that quote
that
and say.
Russia is on the verge of.
I think that
Well,
I
you
just
said
made
you're
very
not
clear.
naive, and you're doing exactly what she said would be naive. So
She said that
on
at
that
a specific
day,
time,
right, exactly.
given a
So you're
specific
saying-
situation. The situation's different today.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, I have a couple that.
Well, one more, please. To what extent do you think that the Russians will be serious in pressing the Syrian regime? And they are saying today that they have evidence that the opposition has used the chemical weapons.
Again, we've been very clear that we have seen no credible evidence that the opposition has used chemical weapons. And I will say it one more time. The Secretary said when it comes to the Russian intentions, we're going to verify and verify. A good takeoff on Ronald Reagan's famous line, of course. But look, what we're focused on is action. We got a good framework agreement we were happy with. But what we're focused on now is hitting some of these markers, coming up on some of these timelines to see what people put on the table and how serious it is. But the international community will be looking to the Syrian regime to live up to their obligations. We'll also be looking to Russia to live up to its obligations and what it said it would do in bringing the Syrian regime along with this plan. Yes, let's move on.
You can knock them off.
Yep.
I'd like to ask about the detention by the Bahraini government of Khalil al-Marzouk. He's a senior official in the Al-Wafaq opposition party, and apparently he was arrested for for incitement on a speech he gave. But he's someone who's actually in the National Dialogue, and was just wondering if you have any comment on that.
Yep, a couple of points on that. Obviously, we're following the case closely. We'll be raising it with the Bahraini authorities as part of our discussion of recent political developments in Bahrain. I think the bigger context is important here, that we are disappointed that opposition groups have suspended their involvement in the national dialogue that you just mentioned. We believe that the national dialogue is an important step in a longer process that leads to meaningful reforms and that addresses the legitimate aspirations of all Bahrainis. So we'll continue to encourage everyone to participate in it.
Okay, but how can you be disappointed that they don't believe that the Bahrainis are operating in good faith if they're arresting people that they're having a dialogue with?
Well, I don't have anything further on this specific case. But we know this national dialogue process is difficult, and nobody's naive about that. I'm going to keep using that word now because you like to focus on it. But we are disappointed that opposition groups have suspended their involvement. We think it's an important forum. We would hope that everybody would be part of that
Are you
process.
disappointed that that the Bahraini regime is arresting people that they're actually supposed to be having a political dialogue
We'll
with?
be raising this case with the Bahraini authorities, as I just said, and I just don't have anything further on this specific case.
Just to make it clear, you used the word naive twice before it ever came out of my lips, and I just want to I want to make sure one
You
thing.
want to go on the record with that?
On this, on Bahrain.
On Bahrain?
Just to put a fine point on this,
Mm-hmm.
you think that the problems that are the lack of progress in the national dialogue is due to the opposition?
I didn't say that.
Well,
That's a
what
sweeping statement.
I'm trying to
Is there a
find out
question?
what. Yes. Do you think that the reason that the dialogue to date has yet not produced anything is the fault of the opposition?
I'm not going to put blame on one side here. We believe that it's an important process. We're disappointed that the opposition groups have suspended their involvement at this time.
And
I'm
you-
just not going to put blame here on where fault
Okay,
lies.
but you think that they should go back?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Even though the Bahraini authorities have arrested this guy who's the
We
leader.
believe they should be a part of the process.
And
Well,
do you
shouldn't
don't
he be part of the process?
We don't
Not in
support any
jail?
one person, obviously. I'm not going to speak further on his case. We believe that opposition groups should be part of the process.
Okay, well, when you say you're going to be discussing it with his case, you said I think you said you
I
would
did,
be discussing
yes.
his case with the Bahrainis. Well, what will you tell them?
I don't have any preview of what that message will look like.
Have they not been already, has there not already been contact about
I
this
don't
case?
know if we've contacted them on this case specifically. I know we will be raising it. I just don't know if we have, and I don't have a preview for what that conversation will look like.
Okay. Well, it's important to know whether you're going to call on the Bahrainis to release this guy, or whether you think that this arrest was justified.
I understand the question.
So-
If I have anything further about the message that we'll be giving to the Bahraini government as
Okay.
part of this discussion, I'm happy to
But
share it with
I think
you
it's
if I
kind.
can.
I think the reason that you're getting kind of surprised looks here is because the Bahrainis have arrested this guy,
Mm-hmm.
and you seem to be you're upset with the opposition,
I
not
said-
with the government.
I said we're going to be raising the case with the government, but we also
I know, but you
took
don't.
it back a step.
But you can't say what it is that you're going to tell the government.
I-
mean, you
I'm
could
not going to
say
preview that for
based
you.
right, but based on that answer, and you're not previewing it, you could go and say, "Hey, good job, well done. We think that was
I
a
would
really
urge
good
you not
move."
to make any assumptions
Well-
one way or the other about what we're going to say.
Well, don't leave it to us to have an assumption.
I
Make
haven't-
it clear
if I
to
have anything
to us
further
and
to
also
share,
to the Bahraini government
will.
how you think this affects the process.
If I have anything further
Thank you.
on that message, I will share it with you.
Now, could you share with us the status of your engagement with the opposition and at what level?
In
If you-
Bahrain?
Yes.
I don't have any update for you on that. Let me take the question, Saeed, and I'll get you an answer. I just don't know what it is.
I mean, you're disappointed with the opposition withdrawing from the dialogue. What do the Bahraini authorities have to do to keep the dialogue going?
Well, I'm not going to lay out specific steps. Obviously, this is dialogue that's internal to
But
Bahrain.
you just said that the opposition has to return. That's a specific step.
We think that it's an important process. I'm not going to lay out specific markers for the Bahraini government to hit. We just think that people should be part of this process.
Just as a general rule, though, without speaking to this particular case, do you think that political detentions in the middle of a national dialogue are helpful to the climate of a national dialogue?
I don't want to speak to the specific case in
I'm not
any way,
asking
shape,
you
or
to
form,
talk
but
to
it's a case
specific case.
specifically about Bahrain and the national dialogue. Broadly speaking, I think we've made very clear our concerns with that issue around the world, but I don't want to speak at all further to this specific case. I just don't.
So you're basically the Bahraini government today from this podium gets a free pass.
You can characterize it any way you want, Matt. I'm not characterizing it that way.
Well, I don't expect you to, but that's unfortunately or fortunately, whatever.
We're going to raise it with the government.
That's the impression that you have left on us and on the Bahraini government, and
We're going to raise it with the Bahraini government. And I'm going to leave it at that. And we're moving on, yes. Wait, and I'll go right to you in a second. I think Elise had one more follow-up.
Do you have anything
and then I'll go to
on
North
this
Korea.
conviction in Thailand of this Lebanese citizen that is suspected of being a Hezbollah militant
I
that
do.
might have launched an attack against some Israeli interests?
So we welcome today's conviction by a Thai court of Atrice Hussein, a Hezbollah operative detained by Thai authorities in January 2012. We applaud the professional efforts of Thai law enforcement agencies to disrupt this potentially deadly plot, which could have killed or injured innocent civilians. I have a little more information about their investigation, if it's helpful. During the course of their investigation, Thai police uncovered a warehouse where Hezbollah was storing thousands of pounds of explosive material, potentially enough for multiple attacks. And today's verdict, I think, illustrates yet again the global reach of Hezbollah's terrorist arm and demonstrates why countries around the world need to remain vigilant about their activities.
But Marie, I'm sorry, I'm also really befuddled about this Bahrain thing because when you're in the middle of a dialogue and your leader gets arrested, how can anybody assume that that dialogue can go back to where it was?
I don't have anything further for you on this case. I know there's a lot of questions about it.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can get anything more for you and we can talk
But
about
I
it
don't
tomorrow.
understand why you're disappointed that the opposition suspended the dialogue when a leader of their opposition is unable to take part.
Because we believe that the dialogue is important. We believe that it's an important mechanism and it should go forward,
But-
even though it's hard. I just don't have anything
Yeah,
else
but
for
do
you
you
on this.
believe that the dialogue should be just conducted for the sake of dialogue? I mean, when there
No,
are other
absolutely
instances,
not.
you just talk about that these can't be talks for the sake of talks.
Absolutely not.
So why should why should they think that they should just be continuing to have a dialogue if they don't feel that the Bahrainis are in good faith?
Because each case is different. Again, I think I've made clear what our position is on the national dialogue. If I have anything further to share with you on the case of the person who's been detained. We can engage on it tomorrow as well.
Are you not disappointed the Bahraini authorities arrested him?
I'm not going to use that term. Nope, not on this one.
What
Yeah,
is your
North
reaction?
Korea. I said we'll be raising it with them. We know.
So you're not going to give us publicly, like you do in many other cases. You're not
I
going to
don't
give
have
us
anything
publicly your
additionally,
reaction to
anything today for you on this. If I have anything additional tomorrow, I'm happy to share it.
I'm sure the Bahraini government appreciates the kid gloves approach that you're taking to this.
More than I appreciate your helpful commentary.
Yeah, well,
I'm gonna go
I
to
just
North
think
Korea
the point
now.
needs to be, the point needs to be made.
Let's go to North Korea.
On North Korea. North Korean six-party talks delegations Kim Kye-gang said today in Beijing, North Korea wants a six-party talk without any preconditions, but the United States has preconditions for the resumption of six-party talks. What is the real position of the United States for the resumption of six-party talks?
Well, I would remind everyone that the DPRK committed on numerous occasions, including in the September 2005 joint statement of the six-party talks, to abandon all nuclear weapons and existing nuclear programs. We will continue to hold the DPRK to those commitments and its international obligations. I think I would say, again, that the onus is on North Korea here to take meaningful actions toward denuclearization and refrain from provocations. And I just don't have anything further for you on what those steps might be.
Yeah, but does the U.S. have any specific conditions for the resumption of six-party talks? You have any specific conditions?
I don't have any more details for you on what we might be discussing in private diplomatic channels. If I do, I'm happy to share it. I just don't. Yes.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is visiting Washington this week. Can you give us more details as to what he will do and who he will meet and the nature of the visit?
Yes.
Is he just passing Washington to go to Anga, or is he visiting because Secretary Kerry invited him for a formal visit?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, at the invitation of Secretary Kerry, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will make an official visit to Washington September 19th through 21st. On Thursday, September 19th, Secretary Kerry will host Foreign Minister Wang for a bilateral meeting and working lunch as part of our regular consultations. So that's tomorrow. The Secretary and Foreign Minister plan to discuss the full range of bilateral, regional, and global issues, including the Iranian and DPRK nuclear issues, Syria, human rights, the South China Sea, and cybersecurity, in addition to, of course, our economic relationship. This meeting has been planned for some time, following the Secretary's April trip to Beijing.
And would they also be discussing any potential for momentum on the six-party talks? I know it's something that China has been publicly in favor of doing.
Certainly DPRK, the nuclear issues surrounding that will be a key part of their discussion. If we have a fuller readout after it tomorrow, I'm happy to share that. I just have my list here. Again, if I have anything additional that they end up talking about tomorrow, I'll be in that meeting tomorrow before the briefing. So hopefully we can share a little more detail then. One more?
Iran?
One more on Iran, yes.
The government of Iran released some activists probably today or maybe yesterday. Do you see this as another positive step towards something else?
We do welcome the news that some prisoners of conscience have been released from prison today. I believe it was today. We hope that one day all prisoners of conscience in Iran will be released. So I think this is clearly news that we welcome.
Do you know, is the Secretary open to meeting with the Iranian Foreign Minister in New York?
I don't know of any plans to do so. I just don't have anything further for you on his UN schedule.
I understand, but I'm not asking if he's going to. I'm asking if he is open to it.
I don't have anything further for you on the Secretary's thinking about what his schedule will look like at UNGA.
Has there been any requests from the Iranian side for such a meeting?
I don't know the answer
Could you
to that.
find out?
I will try.
Thank you.
Yep.